what we're hearing now, Israeli officials saying, is that Israel might be continuing this intense campaign for a couple of weeks. It might last into the beginning of January, but then it has to simply slow down and not be as aggressive as it is right now, because the civilian casualties will rise, and because the international pressure will be very heavy on Israel. And when we say international pressure, what we mean is, of course, the UN, but Israel is not really listening so much to the UN.
Israel's military yesterday was the most intense day of fighting since its ground operation in Gaza began in late October. Israel says its troops are now in the heart of Khan Yunis after bombarding the southern city overnight. Meanwhile, the UN Food Programme says the fighting has intensified the hunger crisis in Gaza. Let's cross live to Tel Aviv and speak to Jotam Confino, foreign editor of Jewish News and Middle East correspondent. Morning, Jotam.
Good morning.
Just bring us up to speed with the latest situation on the ground, especially around Khan Yunis.
Yeah, so we know Khan Yunis is a particular focus of interest for the Israeli army. It's considered a Hamas stronghold, and that's why it's operating in the heart of Khan Yunis, both with soldiers on the ground facing Hamas terrorists, but also bombarding from the air and firing artillery from the sea. Israel's navy is just outside Khan Yunis and firing at the city. So it's really causing huge distress, obviously, huge destruction. And it's also causing a lot of people to flee and move further south down to the city of Rafa, the Rafa border crossing. But in that particular city, nearly 500,000 Palestinians are already sheltering. So the United Nations is saying it doesn't have the capacity to take any more people. And this is causing, like I said, a lot of distress. But nevertheless, Israel is continuing to focus on Khan Yunis, mainly because it thinks that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, might be hiding underground, but also because there might be hostages, which is something Israel is trying to handle and trying to free them.
That's really interesting. So Rafa, the city of Rafa, as you say, near the Rafa crossing, where so much of the aid has been passing through, is really the last big city that the people can flee to, and yet it's essentially full.
It's essentially full, and at least that's according to the UN. And despite Israel dividing Gaza into zones, it has published a map of Gaza with zones, and each zone has a number. And despite the warnings in Arabic on a daily basis in which zones Palestinians can move into to feel safe, there is a lot of fear and panic because the messages aren't getting through apparently in real time due to a lack of internet connection. So it is stressful for the civilians. It is chaos for them. But Israel says it's doing everything it can. It can't do more than this. And in order for Israel to prevent civilians from being killed, Hamas has to remove itself from the civilian areas. And we all know that they're not doing that. In fact, they're trying to hide even more in between the civilians.
I mean, Israel claimed yesterday, Jotam, that it was the most intense day of fighting since its ground invasion began at the end of October. I mean, is there almost a sense now that Israel is aware it might have a limited window to go after the Hamas leadership, which of course it wants to eliminate, but because of growing international pressure?
Absolutely. We even heard before the ceasefire, the foreign minister saying that Israel has about 2 to 3 weeks of a window of opportunity where they can operate without being pressured too much. Now, there was a ceasefire after he said that, but now we're basically back to that situation. So what we're hearing now, Israeli officials saying, is that Israel might be continuing this intense campaign for a couple of weeks. It might last into the beginning of January, but then it has to simply slow down and not be as aggressive as it is right now, because the civilian casualties will rise, and because the international pressure will be very heavy on Israel. And when we say international pressure, what we mean is, of course, the UN, but Israel is not really listening so much to the UN. It's more listening to the United States. The minute the United States starts changing its tune and doesn't back Israel unconditionally, then Israel will have to start changing its operations in Gaza.
And if that happens, if the US does start changing its tune, will that be in the form of the US publicly saying something, or will, as you know, a lot of people say, probably privately, Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden maybe just urging caution on the part of the Israeli government?
I would say both. We already know that there has already been tremendous pressure by Blinken and Biden on Israel to change some of its policies. We saw Israel going from a zero-tolerance policy in the very beginning of the war, a huge blockade on Gaza, nothing could come in, no electricity, no nothing. And they changed that policy because of US pressure. So we'll start seeing more pressure behind closed doors, but we'll also start hearing a change of rhetoric. And that's what we're slowly beginning to hear, for example, from the Vice President Kamala Harris, who said civilian death toll is far too high. Anthony Blinken is demanding certain things of Israel when it's conducting itself in Gaza. So we are definitely seeing a change of rhetoric, and that's likely what we're going to see in the coming weeks as Israel continues its operations.
And Jotam, we can't forget in all of this the civilians who are still being held hostage by Hamas. Any updates on that?
Sadly, yes. At least 7 have been declared dead by Israel. We don't know if Israel has found their bodies, but we do know that they can verify that these people have died. It's both young people, but also old people. And we know that 136 people are still in Gaza. And Israel has tried to get the women out. We know that at least 5, 6, 7 women are in there still. And what we're fearing, what Israel is fearing, and what the United States also is fearing, is that the reason why they haven't been released by Hamas is because they are being raped, sexually assaulted. And Hamas doesn't want them to tell their stories. So there's a huge concern right now about what it is they're going through. We know some of the stories from the hostages that have been released, horrific stories we've heard, and this is just a fraction of what we are yet to hear about the conditions of the hostages.
Jotam, thank you so much. Jotam Confino, foreign editor of Jewish News and Middle East correspondent, speaking to us live from Tel Aviv.